The morning shift begins before the sky is light. A locomotive moves out of the yard at Halle, its exhaust beating against the cold air in short, heavy strokes. The consist behind it is fully loaded. Brown coal in open wagons, 40 of them, bound for the power generation plant at Berlin. The gradient out of the yard is slight, but the locomotive is working hard. The fireman watches the pressure gauge hold steady at 15 bar. The exhaust is not white. It has never been white. The locomotive is a Deutsche Reichsbahn class 52.80. It is a 210, 10-coupled driving wheels, a broad, deep firebox built to accept the fuel it was never originally designed to burn. Its cylinders measure 600 millimeters in diameter with a 660 millimeter stroke. Its driving wheels are 1,400 millimeters across. When the boiler pressure in service runs at approximately 15.7 bar, 228 pounds per square inch. It was rebuilt in East Germany in the early 1960s from a wartime Kriegs locomotive. It was designed to survive on the only fuel the German Democratic Republic had in abundance. That fuel was lignite, brown coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel burned at industrial scale in 20th century Europe. And the smoke from that firebox is settling on the stone buildings of Halle. It has been settling on those buildings for 30 years. It will settle on them for 30 more. Before we continue, if this kind of railway history matters to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Every video here is built around the locomotives and railway systems that the standard histories overlooked, the machines that outperformed their celebrated counterparts, the engineering decisions that were ahead of their time, and the railway lines that shaped nations without receiving the recognition they deserved. If that is the kind of documentary worth watching to you, the subscribe button is how you tell us, and we want to hear from you. Did you work on the railways? As a driver, a fireman, a fitter, a signalman, a track engineer? Did a parent or grandparent spend their career on a railway that is no longer operating, on a locomotive class that is no longer preserved, or in a workshop that is no longer standing? Leave it in the comments. The people who actually operated these machines know things that do not appear in any published railway history. We want to hear from them. Now, back to the locomotive. The Class 52.80 did not arrive in East Germany by choice. It arrived by constraint. When the Second World War ended, the Soviet Union stripped the Eastern Rail network of virtually everything of value. Electric locomotives handed over as reparations. Overhead lines dismantled and removed. Second tracks pulled from double-track main lines. The Deutsche Reichsbahn in the GDR began its post-war existence with less than it had started the war with. What remained were the Kriegslokomotiven, the war engines. Over 800 Class 52 locomotives in various states of damage and exhaustion. From them, between 1960 and 1967, 200 were rebuilt at the Reichsbahn Ausbesserungswerk at Stendal into the Class 52.80. New boilers, new cylinders, new cabs, but the same basic machine and the same basic problem. The fuel they would have to burn. Lignite is not what a locomotive boiler wants to burn. It is soft, crumbly, and wet by comparison to hard coal. Its calorific value is roughly half that of the bituminous coal burned in British or American locomotive fireboxes. It carries high sulfur content and releases thick, dark particulate smoke on incomplete combustion, which is almost certain when it is burned in fireboxes designed for a different fuel. at firing rates determined by a timetable, with grates that were engineered for a different grade of coal entirely. The GDR had no choice. After the oil crisis of 1973, the state intensified its dependency on domestically mined broncola. By the mid-1980s, lignite accounted for approximately 70% of the GDR's primary energy consumption. The Deutsche Reichsbahn was burning it. The power stations were burning it. The apartment buildings were burning it in ceramic-tiled ovens. The result was measured. In the 1980s, the GDR emitted more than 5.8 million tons of sulfur dioxide annually, the highest total in Europe. The Leipzig and Halle industrial corridor registered annual sulfur dioxide concentrations exceeding 400 micrograms per cubic meter. That figure is 40 times the level considered safe today. Contemporary medical records from the Espenhain district near Leipzig documented that 4 out of 5 children developed chronic bronchitis or cardiovascular conditions before the age of 7. Around Leipzig, life expectancy was 6 years below the national average. This was not published. This was classified information. The locomotives were part of that system. The class 52.80. In the class 50.35, every heavy freight machine the Deutsche Reichsbahn operated in the 1970s and 1980s was burning lignite through a firebox that produced exactly the kind of exhaust the medical reports were documenting. The engineers at the Deutsche Reichsbahn knew what lignite did to their locomotives. Fireboxes designed for hard coal wore out faster on brown coal, which burned cooler and left more ash on the grates. Boiler pressure dropped below specification during heavy firing because the thermal energy per kilogram of fuel was simply insufficient. Maintenance cycles shortened, tube cleaning intervals tightened. The grate area on the rebuilt Class 52.80 boiler was designed to compensate. The combustion chamber boiler of the 50E type gave more time for the fuel to complete its burn, drawing down the worst of the incomplete combustion that produced that black exhaust column. It was an engineering solution to an engineering problem that should not have existed. The West German Deutsche Bundesbahn retired its last regular mainline steam locomotive in 1977. It had the hard currency, the industrial infrastructure, and the political freedom to purchase diesel and electric traction. The Deutsche Reichsbahn in the GDR ran regular mainline steam until October 1988, 11 years longer. That 11 years was not nostalgia. It was not a preservation program. It was an economy operating at the edge of what its energy base could sustain, using locomotives rebuilt from machines that had been designed to be expendable in wartime, burning fuel that was the wrong fuel, on a railway that had been deliberately degraded by reparations. The crews who drove the Class 52.80 across the Saxony and Thuringia lignite belts in the 1980s were not unaware of what they were working in. None the smoke was visible from the cab before it was visible from the line side. The smell of burning lignite in the footplate was a specific and identifiable smell, sulphurous, acrid, with the particular residue of incomplete combustion that meant the firemen had more work to do. They did the work. After reunification in 1990, the environmental data that had been classified for decades became public. The figures were extraordinary. In 1988, the GDR emitted 10 times as much sulfur dioxide per square kilometer as the Federal Republic, despite having a fraction of its industrial output. Particulate matter loads, the solid particles deposited on surfaces, ran more than 10 times West German levels. Many of the GDR's major rivers were biologically dead. Half the population received inadequate clean water. And the buildings, the stone buildings of Leipzig, Halle, Zwickau, Görlitz, the 19th century civic architecture, the Wilhelmina apartment blocks, the railway stations, were uniformly black, not weathered grey, black. The soot deposited by decades of lignite combustion had chemically bonded to limestone and sandstone facades. When restoration began in the 1990s, cleaning revealed stonework that had not been seen since before the Second World War. Some buildings revealed original carved decorative detail that no living person had ever seen in its original state. The locomotives were not the only source of that deposition, but they were part of it, moving through those cities every day, burning the same fuel in the same incomplete way, leaving the same sulfurous residue on every surface within range of the exhaust plume. They were ordinary machines doing what they were asked to do. The engineering was sound enough, within the constraints it operated under. The problem was not the locomotive. The problem was the system that needed it to be there, burning that fuel, on those routes, for 11 years longer than any comparable railway in Europe. The Deutsche Reichsbahn ran its last regular mainline steam working in October 1988. The machines it had kept running, through reparations, through the wrong fuel, through engineering programs that rebuilt wartime austerity locomotives into something the economy could use for another 3 decades. Those machines are gone now. A handful are preserved. The Class 52.80 units that remain exist in railway museums and on heritage lines, burning hard coal, producing clean white exhaust, looking nothing like what they look like in service. When Germany reunified, the sulfur dioxide concentrations in the Leipzig and Halle corridor collapsed by 60% within 2 years. The power stations shut down or were rebuilt. The coal ovens in the apartments were replaced. The rivers began to recover. The buildings took longer. The stone facades of Eastern German cities bear that record, cleaned now in many cases. But the chemical damage done to the deeper layers of stone is not always reversible. The carbonation of limestone by sulfurous acid leaves a permanent alteration in the crystal structure of the stone itself. The soot is removed. The chemistry remains. The locomotives that burned through those decades did not cause this alone, but they were the visible part of it, the moving, exhaust-trailing, exhaust-depositing part, passing through towns and cities that had no voice to protest, along a railway that was classified information, in a country whose environmental data was a state secret. The engineering record does not change. What those machines did, and what burning them cost, is in the medical records of the Espenhahn district, in the chemical analysis of Leipzig's restored stonework, and in the memory of the people who drove them. It is not generally in the railway histories published in English. That is what this channel intends to correct. If this is the kind of railway history you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. There are more locomotives, more railway systems, and more engineering achievements still to document. And if you have a connection to what you just watched, a family member who drove this class, worked in the workshops that maintained it, or operated on the railway that deployed it, tell us in the comments, what did they drive, which railway, which depot, which line? The people who operated these machines are not in the standard histories. But the engineering record depends on what they remember. We want to hear from them,